Yo, what's going on everybody, it's FreakyDude99 and welcome back to another Destiny 2 Endgame build video. Now this time I actually have a Strand Warlock build for you today. Now of course Prismatic is all the hype, it's amazing, it does everything, but of course we need to jump back to some of our old original subclasses. And for this build, I think it is best as we are using none other than one of the brand new exotics that came out with Final Shape, Matatadoxia. This is a Warlock exotic that really amplifies the power of Strand Warlock, and while you can use it with Prismatic subclass, I think the full power of this exotic is exemplified just going straight Strand, getting all of the suspending action that provides, as well as having all of these Unravels tear apart all of your enemies. I've been using this in Grandmaster Nightfalls and absolutely destroying them while also providing a huge amount of crowd control for my teammates, allowing them to survive a lot longer and us to get through any piece of content much easier. Now of course with all my builds there's going to be a picture at the end of the video along with a dim link in the description for easy copying. And be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already to not miss out on any future build videos. And with that, let's jump into the build. Now starting out with the build, of course, we have our subclass and we are rocking Strand, and Strand of course brings us the super Needlestorm. Needlestorm is just one of the highest damaging supers in the game, and it absolutely provides a huge amount of burst damage to take down any champion or boss that you need to. It's beautiful to pop this thing whenever you suspend a group of champions or there's just a huge swarm of enemies in front of you to absolutely take them down, and if any needles miss, they turn into threadlings for that extra damage. Moving forward from that, we are taking Healing Rift, as Healing Rift just helps out a ton in endgame content. Being able to put down a little circle that provides us healing and overshield if we're at full health is really nice, because of course, as much as Empowering Rift is useful in certain situations, when you're in endgame content and you're just getting hammered with damage after damage, you need something to just provide yourself an extra layer of survivability. Of course, being on Strand, we are using Arcane Needle. Arcane Needle is a fantastic melee and probably one of the best melees in the game, just for the fact that it has a pretty much infinite range on it, allowing you to snipe down enemies from across the map, unravel them for extra damage, as well as it grants you 3 melee charges, letting you bam combo 3 Arcane Needles one after another. The neat thing with melees that have multiple charges is that the more charges you have, the faster your regen is on your next charge. So the optimal way to actually use Arcane Needle is to just use 1 charge while you have 2 charges slotted in. This way that regen is going absolutely crazy and you can spam out Arcane Needles much faster than if you were to just spam them out and use the final one until you get it up over and over again. Forward from that, we are taking Shackle Grenade. Now Shackle Grenade is an excellent grenade. It suspends enemies, allowing us to stun unstoppables, as well as suspend a group of enemies in case there is a massive wave of enemies coming towards us, like gladiators and stuff like that. Really nice to just give ourselves some space to allow ourselves to back up and take down some enemies, but also having Shackle synergizes with our first aspect, which is Mind Spun Invocation. This allows us to actually consume our Shackle Grenade to activate the Weaver's Trance buff, which makes it so final blows while Weaver's Trance is active creates a suspending detonation. This means that we have absolute insane crowd control no matter what situation we're in. As we just consume that Weaver's Trance, we get it going for about 25 seconds, and then everything that we're taking down is suspending enemies around itself, and that just means that we have absolute control over any battle that we're heading into. It's really nice as well in endgame content like Grandmaster Nightfalls, when groups of enemies can just pour out, they can take you down super quickly, but with this you just take down one enemy in the middle of a group of enemies and boom, they're all suspended, allowing you easier access to getting precision shots and also just taking them down as well. Add to that, our second aspect is going to be the Wanderer. Now the Wanderer is a really nice aspect because it makes it so when you throw tangles, they pretty much fly in a straight line, allowing you to snipe enemies from super far away, but also it makes it so your tangle's explosion also suspends enemies. This is really useful as well because this build is all centered around suspending enemies and taking those suspended enemies down, because our exotic grants us increased melee regen whenever we're defeating suspended enemies. So having this just extra layer of suspending on is really nice to have for this build. Now moving down to the fragments, of course our first fragment is going to be Thread of Mind, which defeating suspended targets grants us class ability energy, allowing us to throw down more healing rifts and provide more survivability to us. Second up, we are using Thread of Fury, so damaging targets with tangles grants us melee energy. This allows us to get our melee back even quicker, as well as we're constantly spawning tangles around because we're unraveling and suspending pretty much every enemy, and as soon as you take down a suspended or unraveled enemy, you get a tangle spawn, you shoot that, and boom, it blows up and suspends everyone around it, as well as granting us a burst of melee energy for ourselves. We're also using Thread of Warding, so when we pick up an Orb of Power, we grant ourselves Woven Mail, an extra layer of damage resistance to actually fight against everything that's happening against us. And finally, Thread of Generation, so dealing damage generates grenade energy. All of the suspending and unraveling we're doing is counting as individual hits of damage, and each little point of damage grants grenade energy. This means that we can have our Shackle Grenade up before our Weaver's Trance actually ends, allowing us to consume it in a pretty much infinite loop of us having Weaver's Trance constantly active. Now, that's going to do it for the subclass. Let's move on to those weapons. Starting out with the weapons, of course our main exotic of choice is going to be none other than Monte Carlo. That's right, it's another Monte Carlo build because this one is just fantastic. Auto rifles are in with this final act, Act 3 of Episode Echoes, allowing us to get a huge amount of buffs from our artifact perks that factor into actually using auto rifles, but also Monte Carlo is really nice because damaging enemies with just your bullets grants you melee energy, and when you take down enemies with this weapon, it has a chance of fully refunding a melee charge. This means that Monte Carlo is our pretty much primary weapon no matter what content we're stepping into. It also has the overload rounds, it grants us increased damage resistance when we're using it because of the artifact perks, and it's just a super fun weapon to use because it also allows you to get to ×5 Markov chain, which is pretty much a pseudo rampage on this weapon. When you're at ×5, you have increased damage on this weapon, as well as you can activate the catalyst to go in for a bayonet stab. Monte Carlo is really nice as well because when we have Arcane Needle and 2 charges slotted in, it means that we just have to shoot for a little bit, and pretty much in like 5 seconds you can get that last melee charge back, throw it out, shoot some more, get that charge back, throw your Arcane Needle out again. Monte Carlo is absolutely perfect for this build, and because this build is so versatile, it means that it slots in with any other weapons that you want to use. Speaking of other weapons, for our energy slot you have pretty much a whole slew of weapons that you can use, since this build is able to suspend enemies so often, as well as stun anti-barrier champions from our Arcane Needle from our exotic. It means that our energy weapon is super versatile in what you want to use. For me, I've been using a Baron Action because it's a really nice special sidearm. It's solar, it has heal clip and incandescent, allowing you for more crowd control and damaging, as well as healing whenever you reload after taking down an enemy. I've also played around with things like Martyr's Retribution, but you can also use something like a sniper rifle that you find works well. Again, any weapon you want to slot into that energy slot is going to be able to be used because this build is so versatile and it has the ability to stun pretty much every champion, no issue. And finally, for our heavy weapon, I personally would recommend a Strand heavy weapon. Personally, I've been using Pro Memoria because it not only comes with the Dealer's Choice Origin trait, which allows us to gain some extra super energy, but also it has things like Reconstruction and Dragonfly, which allow us to pretty much shoot non-stop and clear out some extra adds with all the damaging we're doing. Dragonfly plus Weaver's Trance just makes it so suspended enemies get damaged again by Dragonfly, which procs our Thread of Generation for extra damage and extra grenade regen. Now that's going to do it for the weapons, let's move on to those artifact perks. Starting out with the artifact perk, of course we want to grab 3 anti-champion mods in the first column, and these mods are going to relate to whatever weapons we're using. Personally, of course, I use Unstoppable Sidearm, Anti-Barrier Sniper Rifle, and you want to make sure that you're grabbing Overload Auto Rifle. That way our Monte Carlo gets overload rounds to actually stun those overload champions, but also these artifact perks grant the weapons Overcharged, which is a 25% damage buff in endgame content. This means when you're stepping into Grandmaster Nightfalls, you're getting that Overcharged on your Monte Carlo. For the second column, we're grabbing Overcharged Armory, so weapons with Dealer's Choice, Radiolaria Transposer, Collective Purpose, and Sundering Origin traits are always overcharged while we have the modifier active. This of course means that our Aberrant Action and our Pro Memoria are getting that 25% damage buff, really useful, as well as we have Winning Hand. So our weapons with Dealer's Choice Origin trait pretty much get a pseudo incandescent, and the more weapons that you have with Dealer's Choice increases this effect. This means that if you want to use something like the Void Sniper Rifle with Dealer's Choice, Embraced Identity, then that synergizes with Pro Memoria and you can have a cool synergy with that, but also you can just use Dealer's Choice and have the pseudo incandescent going. For the third column, we're grabbing Elemental Siphon, so rapid final blows with a kinetic weapon or a weapon matching your equipped super create an elemental pickup that matches our equipped super. This is going to cause our Monte Carlo to actually spawn entangles as well as our Pro Memoria without needing to have them unraveled or suspended. Really nice to have because again, there's times where we don't have our melee charge, we don't have our grenade in those really rare instances, and having our Pro Memoria or our Monte Carlo be able to spawn a tangle, detonate it, cause suspending, and allow us to get some melee energy back, as well as we are using Threaded Blast, which makes it so destroying a tangle with a strand weapon creates a larger, more damaging explosion. This is why we want to use something like Pro Memoria or a strand heavy weapon. That way, whenever a tangle shows up, you swap over to that weapon, shoot it, detonates in a huge blast, suspends enemies, deals more damage, and then you can swap back to your Monte Carlo. We're also using Monte Carlo for auto rifles because there is sustained fire, which makes it so continuously damaging combatants with an auto rifle grants us damage resistance. Again, we're not on Prismatic, so we don't have the perks of all of those damage resistances melding together and adding a whole bunch of layers of damage resistance to us. So having sustained fire along with woven mail provides us enough damage resistance to survive things like GMs and actually play a little bit more free. For the fourth column, we are grabbing Counter Energy, so whenever us or a member of our fire team stuns a champion, we gain energy for our least charged ability. Really nice to have because we are constantly stunning champions, and we pretty much are the primary stunner for whatever activity we're in because of our exotic and all of our suspending that we're doing. Add to that, we are also using Targeting Autoloader, so while we have an auto rifle equipped, defeating combatants reloads our equipped weapon and temporarily increases weapon damage. This also awards bonus progress when dealing final blows while surrounded. We pretty much are always surrounded in GMs, and we always have Monte Carlo equipped, meaning we're constantly benefited from this perk. And then finally in fifth column, we're grabbing Shield Crush, so while we have our Woven Mail active, our melee is going to be recharging faster and deal increased damage. Really nice to have because we are a melee build, and we are using Prismatic Transfer, so when we cast our super, each member of a fire team with a super different than ours is getting a bonus to weapon damage. Not many people are running Strand supers right now because you're usually running Void on Titans and Arc on Hunters, so having Prismatic Transfer, just a nice bonus to have for our teammates. And that's going to do it for the artifact perks. Let's move on to those armor mods. Starting out with the helmet, of course we are using hands-on, so we gain bonus super energy on our melee takedowns. This is a melee build and we're constantly getting those melee takedowns, as well as when we hit an enemy with Arcane Needle and they're unraveled. When you take them down, the unravel is actually kind of part of a melee takedown, which means we gain that bonus super energy from a melee takedown, even though they were not actually taken down by the Arcane Needle. And then we are also using Kinetic Siphon and a Harmonic Siphon. We're using double siphons here because our Monte Carlo can actually generate Orbs of Power, and our Pro Memoria can generate Orbs of Power. Really nice to have two bases covered because our Monte Carlo is getting tons of takedowns, but so is our Pro Memoria because it has a lot of ammo capacity, and we are detonating those tangles with it, so it means we pull it out a lot and actually take down some enemies. Quickly touching on stat focusing here, of course we want to make sure our resilience is at 100. This is because being at 100 grants us a 30% damage reduction, and when you are in things like Grandmaster Nightfalls, you want to have this 30% damage reduction, especially with this build, because there's constantly so many enemies firing on you, and just being able to survive a little bit longer is a huge bonus to us. Add to that, we also want to make sure our strength is as high as possible. Having a higher strength means we don't have to wait as long for our arcane needle to come up, and we can use it a lot more, especially when we are on that third charge going down and constantly having our 2 charges active while only using that third charge. After that, you want to make sure your discipline and recovery are both pretty balanced. Recovery grants us increased class ability regen, while discipline being higher makes it so we can use our shackle grenade a lot more for that Weaver's Trance. Down to the gauntlets, we're going to be grabbing double impact induction, so whenever we deal damage with a powered melee attack, we're going to be reducing our grenade cooldown. That way we can use that shackle a lot more, as well as we are grabbing heavy handed, so our powered melee final blows actually generate orbs of power for us. Down to the chest piece, we have our exotic armor piece, Matidoxia, which comes with the exotic intrinsic Stylostyxis. This makes it so whenever we damage an enemy with Arcane Needle, they emit a suspending burst once they are defeated, as well as landing multiple Arcane Needles on the same target immediately trigger a larger, more powerful detonation of suspending. It also makes it so when we defeat suspended targets, it's going to be granting us melee energy, as well as it makes it so our arcane needles are strong against barrier champions. This being strong against barrier champions is really underselling it because it is a one-hit pop on barrier shields, allowing you to pretty much not need to run an anti-barrier weapon because you just need a single charge your melee up to pop a barrier shield even if it's in a Grandmaster Nightfall. As well as defeating suspended targets grants us melee energy is huge because with Weaver's Trance we are constantly suspending everything around us, and this is what really makes it more useful to use on Strand rather than Prismatic because we are getting Weaver's Trance from our Shackle Grenade and our Mind Spun Invocation. As well as this means we can land a single arcane needle on an enemy surrounded by other enemies and take them down with Monte Carlo for them to suspend everything around it, as well as this stacks on top of Weaver's Trance, making it we have multiple layers of suspending going on, and all of these are individual damage procs which constantly generates grenade energy from our thread of generation. All of this fueled together leads into an absolutely insane build where you are constantly suspending everything around you, constantly detonating all of these different suspension procs from your tangles, from your arcane needles and your Weaver's Trance, which leads into an infinite uptime on Weaver's Trance and being able to throw out shackle grenades if you need to, as well as having arcane needle pretty much always active and throwing those needles out and unraveling everything around you. This exotic is just so good, and the fact you can just one-shot anti-barrier champions is huge because that just means you don't need to run an anti-barrier weapon. You can slot in Monte Carlo no matter what content you're running, use something like a Baron Action or any of the other special weapon sidearms or sniper rifles, and it just means you have a huge amount of versatility in what you want to do because everything's covered by your Monte Carlo and your suspending and your arcane needle. It's just a beautiful build that works together so well, especially when you are running Strand. Now for the mods on your chest, of course you want to make sure you are matching whatever the current threat modifier is. So this means that if there is currently a solar threat in the activity you're jumping into, you want to rock a double solar resistance along with a third different elemental resistance to balance out all of the damage being dealt to you. This means that if you're facing something like Fallen, there's usually a lot of arc damage. If you're facing Vex, there's usually a lot of Void. If you're facing Cabal, it's usually a lot of Solar. So you just want to balance yourselves out, but always make sure you're matching the threat modifier with 2 elemental resistances. Down to the legs, we're grabbing a double kinetic weapon surge for a 17% damage increase on our Monte Carlo. Really nice to have because even with the overcharge buff on it and Markov chain at ×5, it can still fall behind a little bit in damage, especially when in Grandmaster Nightfalls, but having double kinetic weapon surge just balances out enough that you can use it to actually take down all the enemies that you need to. as well as we are grabbing recuperation, so whenever we pick up an orb of power, we're granting ourselves a little burst of health. Really nice bonus to have, as when you're in the thick of things and your health goes down real low, you don't have chances to throw down that healing rift all the time, so being able to spot an orb of power, run to it, slide into it, and get that burst of health can really increase your survivability and prevent you from going down all the time and stuff like GMs. Down to the class item, finally, we are grabbing one bomber, so whenever we use our rift, we are granting ourselves a little bit of grenade energy. We're also using Reaper, so whenever we use our rift, we're making it so our next weapon, Final Blow, is going to generate an orb of power, as well as Font of Restoration, so while we have an armor charge, we are granting ourselves a plus 30 to our recovery, just to balance those stats out a little bit more. And that is going to do it for the build. Now, this is an exotic that I actually slept on, and when I was going through my exotic kiosk, I found it and I was like, oh yeah, that exotic. I meant to use it with something in Prismatic, but I didn't find it perfectly slotted in with Prismatic, just because Prismatic didn't have a whole lot of suspending options for Warlock. But once I went to Strand, and as much as I wanted to use Prismatic because of the whole grenade, the damage resistance, everything going on with it, I found that Strand actually used it way better, and having all of the Weaver's Trance and the suspending procs means that you have your grenade up constantly from Threaded Generation, you constantly have your Arcane Needle up from Metidoxia, and all of the tangles going off granting you melee energy. And slotting in Monte Carlo means you're using that auto rifle for all those artifact perks, as well as you're generating more melee energy for yourself, which means you can just throw out an Arcane Needle, generate that last third charge, throw out another, generate another charge, and keep your cycle going on all of the unraveling you're doing to all of the enemies around you. This also means that you constantly have your grenade coming up because impact induction is constantly being procced from your Arcane Needle damaging, as well as you have just tons of orbs spawning around you. You have tons of ability regen for everything, like your class ability, your grenade, and your melee, and it's just such a beautiful build. And it's also just like nice going back to Strand, especially with everything being around Prismatic, and having something be a little bit more simple and be a little bit more old school, and getting away from all of the Prismatic hype and just slotting into Strand, as well as you'll find that your teammates will be really surprised because usually they're all running Prismatic and you just come in with the Strand, you suspend everything, you unravel everything, everything is getting detonated and taken down, and you're using this exotic that probably not a lot of people are using, at least I haven't personally seen using, because it's a lot more niche and harder to build around Prismatic. But if you're like me, you saw this exotic and you wanted to use it, this is the build for you, because this thing takes advantage of everything Strand has to offer and provides you a huge amount of crowd control and damaging to absolutely lay out any activity that you jump into, like Grandmaster Nightfalls, which this thing mops through. You just have all of the range you need, all of the damaging you need, and all of the crowd control that you could ever want, and being a Warlock, that's what it's all about. So, of course, with all my builds, there's going to be a picture on screen for easy copying, as well as there's going to be a dim link in the description if you like to save it into your loadouts there. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit a like button on this build and leave a subscribe to not miss out on any future videos, especially with episode 2 Revenant coming out very soon. We just passed 3K subscribers, and it's just such an amazing feeling to know that all of you out there are enjoying these builds, enjoying these videos, and as much as I just love making them, it's great to see that you guys actually love watching them. So thank you so much for the support, for all the comments you leave, for everything that you do for this channel, because all I want to do is provide content, provide entertaining builds and fun builds and stuff to try out, as well as just share my love of Destiny 2, because as much as things might be doom and gloom, I know I love this game and I'm sure you love it too, and there's nothing better than jumping in, trying out a new build, playing some content, playing some activities, and just having fun with it. So, thank you everybody so much for watching. I have been FreakyDude99, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.